scale support for local initiatives and establish his position of influence as a forward-thinking educational innovator. He earned his doctorate in educational leadership at the University of Southern California in 2009. I want to welcome David to our 2020 forum. We all know how important schools are to each and every one of us in our community of Pleasanton, so take it away.
Well, thank you, Lori, and thank you everybody for having me again. It's always fun to come to this group. It's a rancorous group and lots of fun questions, so I'm looking forward to that part of the presentation. But I also thought this time that it was a great opportunity to introduce to the group two of our executive leaders who have joined the team since the last time Patrick and I were here. And so I brought them along. I've asked them to each spend a little bit of time in their areas, and then we'll get to some Q&A and fun stuff after they've had a chance to present. And we're going to start first with Mr. Ahmed Sheikhosalami, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Business Services. He oversees our business department, but also our maintenance and operations departments, the construction work that we're doing, and hopefully you're seeing across the district, as well as our technology department. And so Ahmed joined the team in November, came to us from Menlo Park School District. He has a great deal of experience with construction, but also in finance. And so he was a huge add to our team, and we've seen wonderful things occur since he's been on board. And so this is an opportunity to hopefully have you be able to put a face to a name and gain a little bit of understanding of where we are with the wonderful 2020 financial situation, which, oh my Lord, this has been a year so far, and we're about halfway through it, I think. But since the virus hit us 4.5 years ago, at least it feels that long, Ahmed has been a key member of the team that's been helping to support the background work to make sure our kids and students are safe. So Ahmed, you want to, Patrick, if you'll pull up the presentation so people, or Ahmed can step through it and people can see it, that would be awesome.
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well in this remote era of ours. I know many of you, and I've met you through the different forums and stuff like that. And for those who I don't know, I'm looking forward to getting to know you and working with everyone in the Pleasanton community. Thank you, David, for that introduction. Again, our department deals with everything that is the non-educational, the backbone and the working operations of the district. And nothing is more important than obviously the budget and the sound financial systems, as you all know, as business people. So I just want to give a high level. And again, some of you may have heard some of parts of this discussion, but just wanted to give a high level overview of how school state funding works, what our budgets look like, and then I'll dive into some of our current issues that we're dealing with. In the state of California, schools are funded through a formula called the Local Control Funding Formula, and it provides a per student funding for us. And what that means is, you have 2,000 K3 students, you get a certain dollar. For middle school and high school, you get slightly different dollar amounts. And that primarily is the driver of funding, and that's why attendance is very critical. That funding makes up about 90% of our funding. There are other funding sources that we receive through the state. There's a SELPA for special education, and then there are some federal dollars that we receive, and then the local dollars are usually through donations and other type of facility rental type of activities that occur, PTAs and boosters, and also through parcel taxes. And in Pleasanton, we don't have parcel taxes. And so that formula for 90% of the schools in California, that is the model that they're in. There are a select group of districts in very affluent communities, but also it has a lot to do with the way the property taxes were set back in Prop 13 era as well. And so in those communities, the amount of local property tax exceeds the formula. And so they get to keep that excess property tax. So in Pleasanton, we do have a very strong property tax base, and that does help us in our bond measures when we do want to fund facility improvement. However, it doesn't go above the minimum guarantee. And so the way the formula works is up to the property tax feeds whatever it can. And for Pleasanton, it's about 54% of that LCFF formula is through local property tax. And then whatever is short, the state comes in and fills the rest of it. And that's our situation. That's the situation with most school districts. Now you may go, for example, to another community and their local property tax isn't as strong and maybe 10 to 20%, and then the state is backfilling them 80%. And so that's why we are very dependent on that funding formula. Districts like ours do take initiatives for local control and do create, community givings and strong parcel tax measures as well in other communities who want to kind of take that control in their own hand and expand services. Next slide, Patrick. So just how do we compare in terms of our funding revenue per student? Because that's real critical. So Pleasanton is pretty much slightly lower than the state average, but very similar to our other school districts in the Tri-Valley area with Dublin, San Ramon, and Livermore. And primarily the reason of that is the LCFF formula tends to support schools with higher concentration of what I call unduplicated students, or those are English language learners, our foster youth, our youth who qualify for free and reduced lunches. And that additional funding is targeted to help those students. And we do have, I think our percentage of students in that category is around 15 to 17%. So we do receive some supplemental funding, but it's not as high as, let's say, an Oakland Unified or a Hayward. However, as I indicated, school districts that are community funded, like Palo Alto Unified, which is in Santa Clara, they have an extremely strong property tax base. So they get to keep those dollars. In addition to that, they have parcel taxes and they have large community givings. That together puts them on an almost different stratosphere of funding. Funding doesn't always equate to better education, but it does equate to greater resources, higher wages, and attraction being able to retain and also providing their staff with a competitive salary. So they kind of get some of the best employees. However, as we know, living in Palo Alto and that area is not, it's very expensive. So we do have the advantage of a slightly, less expensive home and housing situation, but not that much more. We're still very expensive in this area. Next slide. So this is a kind of a generic pie in terms of, again, what we talked about, our revenues. This is from last year's what we call our second interim or our second budget update. And so as you can see, it's very much the local control funding formula, which is heavily state driven. We do receive other state funding through for our special education and other things that come in. The federal and local then round out the rest. Next slide, please. This slide is our expenditures, and we are a people-intensive operation. That is that our education is through our teachers and the support staff that come with it. And so you can see that between salaries and benefits, typically 80 to 85% is what you will see in most school districts in how much we spend on our staff. And then the other 15% are books and supplies and services. And some of those are really fixed, in terms of like your insurance cost and some of your energy costs and stuff like that. And the books and supplies are really to support the students as well. We do have some restricted expenditures, meaning that they have to be spent for particular areas, and that's mainly for our special education students, and about 3% has to be spent on maintaining our facilities. So the year that we ended, the district had a large amount of carryover and other programs, one-time programs that it was ending, and so we did have some deficit spending that fiscal year, and you'll see the out years and how that'll be. Next slide. So before COVID, we had many challenges as our revenues were still not increasing to keep up with expenditures, meaning that that state formula, which is the LCFF, was only being adjusted by a cost of living, or COLA, and our expenses, be it pension and salary increases and other things, were increasing at a higher rate. And so we were already trying, and not only our school district, but all school districts in the state of California, were trying to deal with that. And every school district wants to improve its programs in light of those challenges. And as many of you are aware of, we're also trying to deal with our aging facilities and maintenance as well. So that was before COVID. So after COVID, all those problems exist. And on top of that, now we're educating and operating our schools with COVID-19, either through a distance learning model or a blended model. And the amount of energy and effort that has taken is resources away from all the other things that we're responsible for. So, we've been doing school in this model for decades and decades. Obviously, technology has played a greater role, but in a matter of several months, we've had to pivot to a completely different model. So that has put a major strain on the system. The economic impact from COVID-19 cascades through the state and to us and the funding. And while this fiscal year, the state has done a lot of moving around of monies and applying emergency monies, a rainy day fund, using federal dollars to help shore up the impact to schools, we do see that in the long term, we're going to be heavily impacted. And one of the immediate impacts is the state is going to start to do deferrals, which means they promise the money in the coming year. So in the books, you are given that money, but in actuality, the funding may come a year or two later. And so what that does for school districts is they have to borrow the money in order to be able to fund their activities this fiscal year. And once the state repays the school districts, they'll have to pay those short-term loans back. We do expect that in the next few years, that budget will continue to be tight and there might be further cuts. And we also have to be looking, at our attendance and enrollment, because that's the way we get funded. So there's a lot of different facets to the impacts of COVID-19 fiscally. Next slide, please. So this is the latest, what we call our multi-year budget. And you can see that in 1920, we just ended. We had about $10 million net operating deficit, which we knew we were, and we had about close to 7% reserve. In the 2021, we have tightened our expenditures. We made about $5 million of reductions from where we were. In addition to that, we've been really actively looking at the out years as well. So we have reduced our deficit spending for the coming year because we know that in the out years, the pressure will increase. And so we're very mindful of that and working closely with the board and the community to prepare for those. In one fortunate, the state and the federal government have recognized the impact of COVID-19, and they are providing school districts with some immediate one-time dollars to deal with distance learning, additional expenditures. And we're in the process of planning those things, making sure our students have computer devices and hotspots and professional development. And so everything is really challenged. And so fortunately, we do have some funds to go to deal with those immediate needs. Next slide, please. So through our reduction planning, and we had, I think, maybe 4 or 5 different type of community meetings and forums. And we're actually working with the Superintendent's Budget Advisory Council, which includes both internal staff and also external members of the community. And we've been, when we looked at the areas, we've looked at budget reductions in non-personnel, savings through salary reductions, program and staffing, and trying to align our staffing with our own. So that's been a lot of the work that we did prior, but we've been really looking at, especially with the advisory council, at how can we increase revenues and to try to be in a better situation in the out years with better planning today to increase revenue so we don't have to make those cuts as our state funding may decrease or remain flat. So that's one of the key things we've been working on. Next slide, please. And in the original planning, we indicated we were trying to target $11 million of reduction. However, because the state kept the funding levels at the 1920 level, we were able to, not have to go that deep in funding, and we were about going to hit our about $5.2 million of reduction, and both in non-personnel areas, about half of it, and then the rest half of it in program and staffing reductions, and aligning staffing with enrollment. So we've been doing a lot of tightening up of our spending at the district level. And again, this first year, we do hope to increase revenues in certain areas, but it's really in the out years we want to do greater planning and be able to increase our revenues. So that's a quick high level review of where we are fiscally. I'd be happy to come back in the future and give other updates to this Chamber of Commerce regarding our bond measure improvements and our facility work that we're really ramping up, and you'll see a lot more activity throughout the our campuses in Pleasanton. So that's my high level presentation. I believe Dr. Woodward, you're next, and turn it back over to Superintendent Haglund.
Patrick, if you could pull that down for a second, that'd be great, just so I can see the group. Good, everybody's awake, we're doing well. It's 7:30 in the morning, we're pushing at it. Now we're gonna talk about academics, and that's a huge piece of our work, as you already know. This, I believe, is the first time that many of you will be introduced to Dr. Janelle Woodward. She came to us last July and walked right into the Carmageddon in the parking lot at Amador High School. It helped us navigate that. Stepped from there into the norovirus at PMS Middle School. And then after we get that cleaned up and started working on budget and getting our feet back on the road, we walked headfirst into the COVID-19 virus. So Dr. Woodward and her team have had a banner year. There's no question about that. They've worked incredibly hard. And I think you'll see some of that in Janelle's presentation this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Janelle, and as she starts talking, we'll get Patrick ready to open up the presentation for her.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you. I do remember when we started the school year last year, we were out the first day at Amador Valley High School. We were helping to navigate traffic, and that was taking our time and our effort, and we knew how to do school the way we were doing it. We wanted to continue to improve in order to secure student outcomes and equip our teachers with the skills that they needed so that they could teach in the 21st century. Little did we know that that meant we were preparing our staff and our community and our students to be on remote learning several months later. So we are very proud of the work that our district had already been doing in the area of technology and innovation, because that has helped us to be able to quickly pivot and do what we're doing now. So Patrick, if you don't mind going to the next slide. So paramount to our priorities always are the health and safety of our students. We do realize that the academic nature of what we do is highly important. In this environment, we realize we can't achieve high academic outcomes if our students and our staff are not healthy and safe. So in all the decisions that we make, we know that we need to, when we think about bringing students back to school in person, we need to ensure that we are able to adhere to health guidance and that we're able to adequately clean and disinfect all surfaces. The protocol for handling positive COVID cases must be in place before students come back onto our campuses. And then, of course, it is necessary that we have sufficient PPE for students and staff, and that our facilities support current health standards. As well, we need to be able to provide training for staff to minimize health risks, and as much as possible, reinforce the physical distancing requirements, minimizing social contact outside of social bubbles, and provide space for students who might be sick, who can isolate until picked up by families. So when we were faced with the concept of being able to bring students back to campus, we had to consider all of these factors. Many of these factors are easier to mitigate at the elementary level. But when we get into the secondary schools and students have to change classes, it's not feasible that our students are able to change classes and remain in the same social bubbles. We also know that middle and high school students don't always keep within their social bubbles. We were intended to be social beings, and we still are. And so when we get together, our tendency is to want to join each other because that's what we have been raised to do. So we had many factors to consider. Patrick, next slide, please. So as it became clear that the virus was going to be longer lasting, after all, we went off, I believe, on March 16th. We were in shelter in place for 2 weeks, and we never came back. And so during the time that we went off in March, we were able to equip our teachers with the skills and the resources and high quality training so that we were able to begin school again in the spring within 1 week. We also, with the help of Ahmad's department, we were able to distribute Chromebooks to students who did not have technology and hotspots so that all of our students had access to the internet and the devices and the tools in order to continue learning in the spring. So what we learned from that time influenced what we wanted to see happen this year. So we had 3 factors that we needed to consider. First, making all decisions through the lens of health and safety. Second, being able to enable parent choice whenever and wherever possible. And third, maintaining our commitment in the Pleasanton Unified School District for providing a world-class education for every student, regardless of whether our students are in remote learning, they're in partial return to campus, or it's full-time return to our campuses. So in order to do that, we began to look at what would our priorities be when we would be able to bring students back to school. How might we do that in order to support our most vulnerable students and our students at highest need? And so we began to prioritize that our little ones, TK through second, the non-readers or the early readers would need to come back to our campuses first because it's very difficult to acquire some of those key skills that students need in the early years, including the socialization and the ability to read and recognize words in print and learn essential mathematical skills from remote. As well, our special day class students, our most vulnerable students with disabilities, we would want to bring them back K through 12. And then our students at Village High School who are credit deficient, we would want to support them as well. So those were our priority groups that we needed to give high levels of consideration to bringing back first as soon as we were able to do that safely. Next slide. So throughout the summer, we did not have, I think I speak for everyone in cabinet, we did not have anything that resembled a summer at all. And we worked together and really just collaborated every single day to come up with the best options for our students. So on the slide I just shared with you, we talked about enabling parent choice when possible. So as we worked with our stakeholders, we had a school reopening task force that included over 100 classified, clerical, and administrative professionals and our certificated, our teachers and managers. They were in a committee and we worked to craft different options. As well, we're extremely thankful for our community involvement as we had a school reopening steering committee that helped influence the work of the greater task force. And so ultimately we came down to two models, and that would be the hybrid, and that would be the remote and in class. So this is where we're starting the year for all students, where we attend school in person when we can. Right now, we know that we're still in remote learning per the governor's order, but we may stretch into partial return, or we may slide back into remote learning depending upon health conditions. So that is where we're beginning the year, all remote. The other option that we presented to parents was the Flex Academy or elementary at-home learning. We're still doing this. The students who are in the Flex Academy or at-home learning, since we're all starting remotely, are starting together with our hybrid students. And so the students who have selected Flex Academy or elementary at-home learning have been coded within our system. And when the time does come for our students to return in person, whether it's partial or full return, then our students who selected Flex Academy or elementary at-home learning will continue to be supported with high quality learning and activities from their homes. As well, we are expanding our long-term independent study program. Independent study is very different from the first two options in that it does not require daily in-person or virtual attendance. It's more like the homeschool model, but with the curriculum and the direction provided by the school district. And students do sign a contract and adequate progress is expected. Next slide. So I had some very technical slides up that I was prepared to show you, but I thought that what we would do instead is that I would describe a little bit about what's really going on in our classrooms right now. So a couple of things before we get to this that I wanted to be able to provide you with an overview is that right now our students are in school remotely on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. They are receiving instruction from their certificated teachers, and we have a more structured schedule than we had in the spring. In fact, our elementary schools have been broken down into instructional blocks with some time set aside in every instructional block for our teachers to be able to engage in live, meaning Zoom or Google Meets, hangouts with our students in order to connect interpersonally, provide students with the opportunity to engage with their peers and to receive direct instruction and an overview of the content for the day. As well, our students in the secondary are attending schedules on block schedules. So instead of having schedules that would include all 6, 7, or 8 classes throughout the day, which could be overwhelming, and that was some of the feedback that we got last year, then they would have 3 or 4 classes a day, making it more manageable for students to be able to receive that instruction and complete that work before the next day. So, and in the secondary, live Zooms are required every day for every period, except for Wednesdays. Wednesdays have been set aside for students to be able to do their independent work. All students will have a live check-in with a certificated teacher during that day, and they will continue to participate in high quality assignments. One thing that we know from reading the literature and from our implementation in spring is that remote learning is extremely time, it takes a lot of time to be able to plan an effective remote learning program. And our teachers still need professional development. So we have set aside Wednesdays to be able to provide our teachers with professional development for them to be able to collaborate together to plan high quality lessons, because collaboration is even more key right now, and for them to be able to do some of the pre-recording for their lessons that they're doing, be able to have office hours with their students, and be able to provide personal feedback to their students. So that is how we're starting the year. So what I wanted to do right now is just to show you what that actually looks like at one of our schools. So in just a minute, Patrick is going to click on the link and he's going to take you to Valley Views. And Valley View is our school that is a dual immersion school. So you're going to hear some English and some Spanish, but it will give you a sense of some of the messaging that's happening at our elementary schools right now. And this was intended to be for the back to school night. And this is Principal Soraya Villaseñor, and she is with her Vice Principal, Gerardo Guzman.
Before I start, I just wanted to make sure that are you all seeing the new screen with the play button in the middle? I just wanted to double check before I hit play.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Good evening, Valley View families. Welcome to the 2021 school year.
Muy buenas tardes, familias de la Escuela Valley View. Bienvenidos al ciclo escolar 2020-2021.
I am Soraya Villaseñor, your proud Valley View principal.
Yo soy Gerardo Guzmán, su director de escuela y también muy orgulloso de estar acá con ustedes.
So this year's theme is Better Together. We really need to make sure that we are working together to ensure that all of our Mustangs have a great, successful academic school year.
El lema para este nuevo ciclo escolar es La unión hace la fuerza. Y ahora más que nunca es indispensable que trabajemos juntos para garantizar un ciclo escolar exitoso para todos nuestros niños.
So we came up with some tips for parents to help make this year as successful as we know it's going to be. Tip number 1. It is important that we designate an area for learning, a quiet learning zone in your house. Tip number 2, provide all necessary materials and have them accessible. We want to make sure that kids are ready to learn. Tip number 3, keep a visible copy of classroom schedules. Having the kids see the schedule will give them an idea of what the day will look like and will keep them organized and on task. Tip number 4, make sure to have an eye on your children to ensure that they are on task. Depending on the age of your child, they will need your support. They will need you there with you at times. And depending, like I said, on their age, they might be able to be more independent, but always keep an eye on them. And tip number 5, check in daily with your children to support their social and emotional well-being. Ask them, how was school today? What did you learn? And if you see anything that's concerning, this is a new challenging year. So anything that's concerning to you, please make sure you're communicating that with your teacher. We want to make sure we're working together to support the whole child, academically, socially, and emotionally.
Hemos preparado esta pequeña lista con recomendaciones.
Okay, so thank you, Patrick. So it's a very engaging video if you wanted to watch the whole things, but I know that we don't really have time for that. But this was just an overview, and the video that Mrs. Villaseñor continued with did lay out additional expectations. But our schools are finding different ways of being able to connect with our families. So as we head into back to school night, the teachers and the principals are going over things like the daily schedule, how learning will work, how assignments will be turned in, exact times when students are expected to check in, where students will access their curriculum, when small groups or interventions will occur, how grades will be administered. So yesterday, Dr. Haglund and I were able to jump into many classrooms, and we were able to see instruction already beginning. It was wonderful. We were able to jump into classrooms at the elementary, at the middle, and at the high school level. And we'll continue to maintain our commitment to visiting classrooms throughout the entire year. The classroom visits just will look differently. And we're continuing to support our administrators and our teachers with the tools and the coaching that they need so that they can be successful. So we're very confident that although this is not what we would like to see happen, we would love to have all of our students back in person, that we are going to have a high quality, a real robust, and a rigorous instructional program that will be delivered to our Pleasanton Unified School District students. Next slide, Patrick. So I mentioned that yesterday, Dr. Haglund and I were able to jump into some classes. And so this is a class that we jumped into at Valley View. It was actually a dual immersion classroom. And so we've taken out the pictures of the students due to data privacy. The teacher, Mrs. Dowes, is on the right. And what she is doing a read aloud to her students. So this is a very typical activity that would be done on the first day of school and throughout the year. And she found a way to bring this alive. So she had the book already, it was all ready to go, it was very presented, and she read with the students. You could see the students on the side, they were jumping in, she would stop and pause, and there would be discussion. And although the students weren't in the classroom, I can tell you by being in the class at the time, that this very closely replicated what would have been happening in the classroom. As well, the students were all responding in Spanish, so it was very impressive, and students were able to use the chat. So we have many more activities just like this happening in our schools, in our classrooms, district-wide, and I just have to tell you, I am so proud of the creative strategies that our teachers are using and their level of work and engagement and commitment to our students. It is very impressive. And I think that as time goes on, our families and our students will begin to see that even though it's remote, that we are indeed delivering the education that they need in order to be highly prepared for their next phase in their educational journey. Next slide. So yesterday we received an email from a parent, and we of course didn't quite know how the first day of school would go. We've never started this year, but this email I just thought really touched our hearts, because we appreciate so much the partnership of our families, seeing how hard we're working and seeing the fruits of these labors in practice. So this parent said, I just want to thank you, the other administrators, counselors, and this was to a principal, each of your teachers and other certificated staff and the classified staff for the incredibly hard work and organization that went into starting the new year. I know it was enormously challenging, and there are so many things that go on behind the scenes that parents, even those of us that are educators, know nothing about. I was so pleased with how smoothly everything went for my 7th grader today. All of his teachers communicated clearly yesterday about his Zoom sessions, and he knew just what to do. I'm not surprised at all by this success, but very grateful nonetheless. And with that, I'll pause that. Next slide. And so on that note, I'll go ahead and I'll end this presentation, my part of it at least, as we continue to move forward in the planning process for bringing our students back in to the school setting in person. We can continue to provide updates. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Haglund.
Thank you, Janelle. I appreciate all your work and for a thoughtful presentation. Patrick, if you could step away from the presentation real quick. I'd like to do some just checking in with the group. If there's questions you would like to ask at this point in time, I do have a really cool video to share with you as a closer. But we don't need to do that right now, because I know there's always questions about our progress on our Measure I-1 work, and I wanted to give you a little bit of a glimpse into some of that work at Lydiksen.
Dave,
So are there questions? Herb?
Hey Dave, yeah. Hey, thanks for coming again. If the state pays based on attendance, do they just do that through the hybrid?
Yeah, so the attendance this year will be very different than the attendance last year. Last year, middle of the year, the governor said, we're going to hold everybody harmless, and we're going to pay you based on your attendance rates in the February timeline before we went into shelter in place. And so they kind of stopped taking attendance at that time, and people went on and did what they were going to do at their local school systems. And I'll tell you, it was all over the place across the state. We were very, very fortunate that the community had supported Measure I-1 and that we had already invested those dollars into technology for both teachers and students. So unlike many districts across the state, we were ready and able to step into remote learning because of the foresight of the community much of it occurring well before I got here. So grateful for that work, Jill and others who worked on that campaign. We just had to figure out how to get devices into the hands of our younger students who we had not deployed devices at the lower grade levels. And so it's pretty exciting at the beginning of the school year. I was driving around in my car with a box full of masks and gloves and Chromebook envelopes, and just stopping off at families' houses, waving through the front window and leaving a Chromebook on the front door for the young kids that were living in the houses. That will be an experience that lives with me for a very long time, just seeing the gratefulness of both the kids and the parents when we were, doing those home deliveries. Not something I ever thought I'd be doing as a superintendent, but something I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to do. But nonetheless, we were able to step into remote learning in a way that other districts were not able to do because they didn't have the technology to deploy. When SB 98 was passed, and if you want to really know what's driving a lot of the decisions at schools, you could look through that law that's associated with the adoption of the budget on June 30th of this year. SB 98 identified attendance requirements and minimum instructional minutes per day. And that, although I personally think that was a great idea because of the fact that distance learning meant something different in every different district. And so it brought some consistency in terms of what it is, how it's defined, and what you have to do to show that you actually did it effectively and had processes in place to catch kids who were kind of falling through the cracks, which did happen in the spring. So in a district where it was a little bit crazy, those structures really helped to bring kids back in and hold districts accountable. In districts that had a plan in place and really had engaged parents, teachers, and students, some of those rules were a little bit obstructive, but we're working through them. And so we do have to take attendance every single day. We have to demonstrate student engagement, which is why there's a minimum requirement of face-to-face engagement, because we have to be able to show that the student was actually there. So a lot of check the box process things that we're required to do that we were already doing. So in one sense, great, it's going to make sure everybody else is doing it consistently, but in another sense, it added a layer of complexity that our organization probably didn't need to have placed upon it. But in August, they started talking about what that attendance would look like. And they're promising a template by September, like a little over a month after we've already been in school, we'll receive the template from the state as to how that's supposed to look. So there's also a learning and attendance continuity plan that's required by the state as a part of the budget adoption. And that has to describe exactly how we're doing attendance, how we're checking on students that aren't being successful or aren't showing for class. And we're right now, if you go to the district's website, there's a link to give input to that process. So I'd encourage y'all, if you have some interest, to get to the district's website and give your feedback to that process, because it'll be used to form the plan, which has to be to the county office by the end of September. Did that answer your questions, sir? Perfect. Other questions?
Dr. Haglund, I think one of the biggest concerns that people have, I know I do, is just the mental state of our young people not being able to socialize, and how do you handling that? I mean, that's got to be a tough one. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure, absolutely. And to be honest with you, the mental state that you should be most concerned about is your superintendent. Because,
yeah, right.
he lives and functions based off of interactions with kids and parents. And, those classroom walkthroughs that we did yesterday, I felt a little bit like a heroin addict, just wanting to get that feed from those kids, and they certainly delivered. But this isolation has been hard on everyone, kids, parents, teachers. We aren't, as Dr. Woodward said a few minutes ago, we're social animals. And in school, I mean, people think about school and they think academics, but they also, we don't always talk about all the other aspects of what educating the whole child means. and the public service that a school system provides to a community. You know, it's because the schools are available that the community is able to function whole cloth. And when schools shut down, that has an extremely negative impact on the business community. It has a negative impact on the families because they didn't want to be teachers, or they would have gotten trained to do that. And now all of a sudden they're supposed to be teaching, you know, algebra to their 7th grade student. And it's like, that's hard. And what you have three, yesterday I checked in on a class at Fairlands, and I was talking to, or was watching the class, and then one of the kids raised their hand. So the teacher said, "You have a question?" The kid said, "I just wanted to say hi to Dr. Haglund." And I recognized the kid as one of the kids that's on their kind of their media crew. So whenever I go out, you know, they like to follow you around, take pictures, and ask you questions. And I also remembered that he had brothers. And I said, "Well, tell your brothers that I said hi." And without missing a beat, they both leaned back in their chairs and waved. You know, so they were all three kids sitting in the same room doing school together, listening to everything everyone else was listening to, and had the forethought to tilt back in their chair and say hello. And so that's complex, if you know what I mean. As a parent's trying to manage multiple different grade level instruction in their house, making sure that the bandwidth is fine. So I appreciate your question, Steve, about wellness, and I can talk a whole lot about student wellness. It's important to me that you understand that we're trying to think about the family, not just the students. We have an incredible social work team that's redirected their energy to ensure that they're watching for and they're receiving feedback from the system of students that are disengaged or students that indicate that they're not in a good space. And, you know, a counselor at the high school, just like they would before, sends an email or sends a text to one of the social workers and said, "I got a student that needs some help." That social worker reaches out to the family to check on the child, because that's where the child is at home. And we've had several situations in the spring, and not yet this year, but in the spring for sure, where students indicated that they were not okay. And in one case, it was an email to me directly about how hard being remote was on them. And I did the same thing. I reached out to one of our social workers. The social worker called the school to get the information, and then called the family. And we ended up setting up an appointment within 24 hours between the social worker and the family and the student as well. And, you know, in the end, the student writes me an email back saying, "Hey, thank you. I really wasn't that bad, but I appreciate you stepping in. I just wanted you to know how hard this was." But they need to understand that when you raise a flag, and we are going to respond as though it's a serious issue, and we want to make sure that you're okay. And it's okay to tell us you're okay, but you're going to know that we're going to be paying attention and responding when we get that information. That help, Steve?
Wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate you talking about the parents. That's a big part too.
It's huge. I mean, there are a number of parents who have voiced their frustration with us because you don't understand what you're doing to us as a family. I can't go back to work if my kids are here, and it's just so complicated. And as a former social studies teacher, I'm aware of these types of things that have happened and the impact and legacy that they leave in a culture and in a community over time. And so having the responsibility to try to maintain connections to school, because connections to school sometimes mean connections to food, connections to technology, connection to other resources. It's just it's a huge project. A huge project. And I'm just really grateful that we have so many community partners that have stepped up and say, "Let us know how we can help."
Dr. Haglund, just want to thank you and Dr. Woodward for your leadership and for really setting us up for success in this program. It's got to be a difficult time for all of us, and just we appreciate it. We're so fortunate to have your leadership at this time in our community. And just thank you for that, Wood. I know you have a big team and you're going to not take any credit, but it takes someone to make sure that all of these things are happening for your community. We appreciate your dedication. We're so fortunate to have all of you with us. Thank you so much. It really is great.
Well, thank you, Bill, and your support and the support of others, not just on this call, but you have friends in the community that have reached out. Just let them know that we're grateful. If you talk to them and we haven't been as responsive as we could be. Everybody's focused on trying to make sure that the teachers and students have what they need to be successful this week. But we could not be where we're at without you and others like you in the community that have drawn up alongside of us. And
thank you. I do have one question, is on the support to back to work. So not everyone's working from home and available to help their children in their learning process. So is there a support that can be added for the children that don't have this parental piece, or are they shared, or any children maybe parents are trading off the duties of the supervision?
Yeah, there are organizations within the community that are, so preschools are still operating, but at a smaller scale. Our preschool programs are operating again at a smaller scale because we all have to fit within the guidelines of no more than 12. And they have to be in bubble cohorts, and so people can't come some days and not the other days. So there's a lot of rules that the health department has placed on us. We're looking at how we might be able to expand those opportunities, including opportunities for students that need academic support when they're not in school. So we're working with the health department. I talk to the health department director every single week for a couple of hours in a group call. And we're pushing on them to give us as much flexibility as they can, but also give us clear guidance so that we know, that we're doing right by our community. And we are getting ready to roll out a daycare program for our employees, and then discounted rates for daycare for members of the community. So we're working hard to try to develop programs that work. And that also meet the guidelines of the health department. So it's a complex mess, Bill. I wish I had a more clear answer for you. Just know that we're thinking about that as well as we're thinking about, what happens in the classrooms during the school day, because we do understand our role in a community is more than just teaching classes.
Great, thank you, Doctor.
Yep.
David?
Steve McCoy, yeah?
Yeah, just a quick question. First of all, great job, great to see you. I had heard that in Dublin that some businesses were opening themselves up as facilities where students could go and get good Wi-Fi if they didn't have access that at home, or maybe for learning, and they would try to place certificated teachers within that. Have you heard about that model, and does that seem viable?
Somebody sent me a link from one of those social media news sites, so it's hard sometimes to know what's accurate, what's not accurate.
Yeah.
I do know that from what I read, it was the Nextdoor app, I think, or Patch. It was the Patch maybe in Dublin. That it's not the district in Dublin, it's the city of Dublin that's supporting those activities. And I would suspect that they would need to be following the same guidelines that we would be following, the group size of 12, the mask wearing and all that fun stuff. But I haven't been communicated with about that specific activity in Dublin. I just saw a little social media post.
Any more questions? Kathy's got one, I think.
I do. So Bill beat me to my comment, or I would have commented about the amazing job the district did during the summer to get to the point yesterday of opening the schools, and what sounds like very successful. And, I think they're huge. Thank you to Dr. Woodward and Ahmad and the entire cabinet for the efforts. So my question with regard to the deferral from the state, I don't know if you've had any conversations yet with the city manager, but several years ago when the state was deferring funding, I believe there was a letter of credit. I don't remember exactly what it was called anymore, but between the district and the city, so that the district could have some access to funding. As I recall, the district never had to use it, but it certainly was a relief to have it in place. And if you haven't initiated conversation, I would certainly encourage you to do so.
Yeah, Nelson and I have already had a conversation about that briefly, but nothing formal yet.
Okay.
that was a great help from what I understand. And we always appreciate our partnership with the city. Nelson and I have worked real hard these past 3 years to create something special between the two of us and between our two teams. And I think that, that work over time has really led to some very positive outcomes for the district, and I hope for the city as well.
Yeah, I would have to agree, and I think there's more to come, or more opportunities certainly to come over the next couple of years.
Yep, I'm excited.
Great, we're about at, I think we just reached 8:30. I know you probably have very busy days ahead. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Woodward, and everyone that joined us on the call. And thank you, Patrick, for being behind the scenes, showing the slides. So I appreciate that. This is recorded. We will post it on our website along with the presentation Patrick sent me earlier this morning. So you'll be able to share that, and we'll be sharing that through our social media channels. And I just want to echo everybody's comments. This is such a difficult time, and you're doing fabulous work. And if there's anything the business community can do to help you in any way, please reach out to me or any of the folks on this call. Most of them are on our board, so we want to help if we can. So,
Steve, can I have 2 closing comments? One in response to your comment just there.
Yes.
One thing I would like to encourage you to do is there are on social media is a beast, as you know, and whether it's on Facebook or Patch or the comment section in the Pleasanton Weekly, this community doesn't need a shot of negative energy. What it needs is a shot of hope, and I would encourage each of you to do what you can in your social media channels to say thank you to the teachers and the classified staff that are working really, really hard to keep our schools clean and ready for kids. And just to encourage the community to, just like in, I don't know, World War II and World War I and the Great Depression, this is a moment for us to come together, not to eat each other up. And so I would appreciate as many people as possible just thinking of ways to be kind and to spread some grace, because our community really would benefit from that. The other comment is, if you want, maybe you don't, but we could play the video as bumper music as you exit, and people who want to stay around and kind of see what's going on at Lydiksen could watch it. But if others want to view it later, they can do it from the downloaded presentation. What do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, let's play it, and those that can hang in there, check it out. It's something positive to end. Thank you so much for those wonderful comments.
Thanks for having me.
This is extra credit for all of you. Give me a
We
gotta pull this up again. There we go.
Thank you. That's good. Yeah, I'm still on the call.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit while it's playing. The Van Pelt Corporation, who we brought on to help lead our Measure I1 work, has got this really cool drone. And so they've been sending us videos every now and then of the progress up at Lydiksen. And this is it's hard to see this when you drive by Lydiksen. You see chain link fences with green cloth on them. But this time you get to see really what it looks like. In this video there, that's the underground utility work. This is the field, or what was the field in the back, and the creation of the secondary drop-off there that comes off of Sandalwood. So they're making great progress on the drop-off. They've already dropped the relocated Kids Club building, which I think comes up in just a minute. And they've laid all the utilities and the foundations and the pad for the 2 new classroom buildings. It's my understanding that the 2 classroom buildings, the walls, which are prefabricated, will arrive next week. And so your people up there are going to start seeing some rapid progress on those 2 new buildings in the back. Why don't you skip forward a little bit, Patrick? Yeah, there's the foundations for the Kids Club building.
David, are you on time on the project, or with all this that's going on?
We're actually ahead, because the fact that the students were not present on campus allowed us to kind of grab a larger piece of the campus and do 2 phases at once.
Wow.
So we're ahead of schedule on this particular project. The Foothill and Amador High School building constructions for the CTE and science classrooms. DSA has approved Foothill, and we expect to get the approval for Amador next week. And so those projects will move forward. You know, you always look for the silver linings when bad things happen. And, you know, one of the silver linings of the COVID situation is that we were able to kind of jump on the throttle on all of our building projects. So the library at Harvest Park is looking great. The fencing projects at the school, if you drive by Vintage Hills or PMS or Amador, you'll note that they're being painted. So we've made some good progress this summer on projects that we would have had to stop prior to the start of school. So we're just keeping the throttle down.
Very cool. Thank you.
Hey, Patrick, skip a little bit further down if you can. Is this the video that has the really cool cement things? I decided that I'm ready to retire because I found something that I want to do. It's this little mini hovercraft that goes over the cement once they've got the pad laid down and smooths it out. And I thought, okay, I want to do that. So if you ever can't find me in my office, you might be able to find me at one of our building projects driving the hovercraft. Yeah, I don't know that this video has the finished pad in, but at Lydiksen, the 2 new pads of the building are actually completed. So Patrick, if you would do this before you send the presentation to Steve, would you go find that other video that Eric sent that actually has the most current pictures from Lydiksen? I think that this group would find that both interesting and a little bit of fun.
Sure thing.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging around a few minutes later. We'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Haglund. Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Great day.